A single, desperate act of mercy, a child's dusty hand offering water to a fallen enemy. This was the spark. In the vast, unforgiving silence of the sun-scorched desert, this small gesture would not only save a life, but ignite a firestorm, forging an unbreakable alliance from the ashes of old hatreds and forever intertwining two destinies that were on a collision course with violence and ruin. Little did anyone know, least of all the child, that this moment under the cruel, watchful eye of the sky was the precise instant the future of Whisper Creek, and all who depended upon it, pivoted on the razor's edge of fate. Justice in the West often arrived in unexpected buckskin. Lily and all of 8 summers knew the language of the wind and the secrets whispered by the shallow, life-giving waters of Whisper Creek. It was her playground, her sanctuary, this ribbon of wet earth that fed their small homestead, a patch of stubborn green carved out of the endless, sun-baked brown by her father Thomas. He was a man of few words, his past a shadow he never invited into the light, but his hands, calloused and capable, spoke volumes of hard work and a quiet, unwavering resolve. His eyes, often narrowed against the glare of the plains, missed nothing. The nervous flick of a deer's ear a quarter-mile off, the subtle shift in the dust that betrayed a recent passing, the almost imperceptible change in the tone of a bird's call that signaled alarm. Their cabin, built of rough-hewn timber and sod, stood as a lonely sentinel. Thomas had chosen this spot with a careful eye, noting the defensible rise behind it and the clear view of the approaches. He taught Lily, and more than just how to fetch water or tend their meager garden. He taught her to listen to the silence, to read the land, to move like a shadow when necessary. He'd shown her how a specific knot, one he tied with a swift, practiced motion she'd never seen other settlers use, could secure a load better than any 3 common knots. Once she'd found him sharpening a long, wickedly curved skinning knife, not with the rough strokes of a farmer, but with the precise, almost reverent honing of a man who understood its deadly purpose intimately. When he'd noticed her watching, his expression had shuddered, the knife disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. These were the quiet undercurrents beneath their seemingly peaceful existence. The peace, however, was a fragile thing. Bartholomew Higgins, a man whose greed for land was as insatiable as the desert thirst, owned the sprawling ranch that bordered their claim. Whisper Creek, the only reliable water for miles, was the jewel Higgins coveted. His offers to buy them out had begun with a false veneer of neighborly concern, but Thomas's polite yet unyielding refusals had slowly peeled back that mask, revealing the grasping ambition beneath. Higgins' visits became less frequent, but his shadow loomed larger. Thomas would often stand at the edge of their property, staring towards Higgins' land, his face a stoic mask, but a coldness would settle in his gut, a familiar sensation from a life he thought he'd left behind. He knew men like Higgins, knew their hunger, and the lengths they'd go to feed it. One sweltering afternoon, the air thick and still, Lily and followed the erratic flight of a brilliant turquoise butterfly, its wings like chips of fallen sky. It led her further than usual, into a sun-drenched arroyo, a dry wash littered with bleached stones and thorny scrub. The butterfly vanished over a crumbling sandstone ledge, and there, in the meager shade of a skeletal mesquite, lay a figure. He was Comanche. His buckskin shirt was torn, stained dark with sweat and dirt. His face, though young, was etched with the agony of exposure, his lips cracked and bleeding. A single feather, tied with worn leather in his dark hair, lay askew. Beside him, a fallen lance, its point buried in the dust. He looked like a broken eagle, brought down from the sky. Lillian's breath caught. Instinct, primal and deep, screamed danger. But as she looked closer, at the shallow rise and fall of his chest, at the tremor that ran through his limbs, a different instinct, one her father had nurtured despite his own hard exterior, rose to the surface, compassion. Her small hand, smudged with the red dust of the arroyo, trembled as she unslung her canteen. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, always stern on this point. Never be without water, and never waste it. This warrior, was dying of thirst. She knelt, the desert heat radiating from the baked earth. "Mister," she whispered, her voice a tiny thread in the immense silence. "Mister, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, then opened. Dark, burning eyes fixed on her, fierce even in their extremity. For a heartbeat, naked suspicion warred with desperate need. He saw the child, the offering of water. Lily, and didn't wait for him to decide. She uncapped the canteen, her movements gentle, and lifted his head just enough to bring the cool metal to his lips. He drank, not like a man, but like an animal starved of water, in ragged, desperate gulps that seemed to draw life itself back into his ravaged body. The sound of his swallowing was loud in the stillness. When he finally sagged back, his breathing was less tortured, a flicker of awareness returning to his gaze. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp emerged. He pushed himself up, first to a sitting position, his muscles trembling with the effort. Then, using his lance as a crutch, he slowly, unsteadily, gained his feet. He looked down at her, a long, unreadable gaze that seemed to sear her image into his mind. Then, with a slight inclination of his head that might have been acknowledgment, or perhaps a warrior's farewell, he turned and, with surprising swiftness for one so recently near death, disappeared into the heat haze, moving with the silence of a phantom. Lily and clutched the now almost empty canteen. The encounter felt like a dream, stark and vivid. The distant sound of hooves, riders approaching, shattered the spell. Panic flared. She scrambled out of the arroyo, heart hammering, and hurried back towards the perceived safety of the cabin. Later, as the sun bled crimson across the western sky, casting long, dancing shadows, Bart Higgins rode up, flanked by two of his grim-faced ranch hands, men whose eyes were as hard and empty as a dry well. Higgins' gaze, sharp and acquisitive, swept over their small homestead. "Thomas," he called out, his voice thick with false bonhomie. Thomas emerged, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He'd been mending a piece of harness, his movements economical and precise. Lily, and, drawn by the voices, peeked from the doorway, her earlier encounter making her heart flutter like a trapped bird. Heard tell there was a Comanche thief prowling the area. Higgins said, his eyes, like a pig's, small and mean, flicking to Lily, and, "Seen anyone looking like they didn't belong, girl? Any red devils been watering their ponies at your creek?" His smile was a predator's, all teeth and no warmth. Lillian's throat went dry. The warrior's desperate, proud face flashed in her mind. Then Higgins' greedy, cruel one. A tiny spark of defiance lit within her. "No, sir," she said, her voice small but clear. "Ain't seen nobody. Just a coyote track this morning." Higgins' eyes narrowed, boring into her for a beat too long. "That's so," he drawled, disbelief heavy in his tone. He turned his attention back to Thomas. "Well, you tell your girl to keep her eyes open. We run a tight ship around here. Don't like trespassers, no matter their color. And we sure don't like folks who might be aiding and abetting them." The threat was as clear as the water Higgins coveted. He touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute, and wheeled his horse, his men following, their passage stirring a cloud of choking dust that settled like a shroud over the homestead. Thomas watched them until they were distant figures. He turned, his gaze finding Lily Ann. He noted the nearly empty canteen in her hand, a detail Higgins, in his arrogance, had overlooked. He saw the faint tremor in her small shoulders, the stubborn set of her jaw. He didn't speak of it then, but a new, deeper line of worry creased his brow. The desert wind sighed, carrying the scent of rain that never came, and a palpable sense of foreboding. That night, the familiar comfort of the cabin felt strained. Thomas moved with a quiet, almost unnerving purpose. He checked the bar on the door, ran a thumb along the edge of the axe propped near the hearth. He saw Lily Ann's uneaten supper, her troubled eyes. Later, by the flickering light of a single tallow candle, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Tell me about the arroyo, Lily, and tell me what you saw." The story tumbled out, The dying warrior, the shared water, Higgins questions her lie. Tears tracked through the dust on her cheeks as she confessed her fear, not for herself, but for him, for their home. Thomas listened, his face impassive, but his hands, resting on the rough-spun cloth of his trousers, clenched into white-knuckled fists. He felt a cold fury, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in many years, stir in the pit of his stomach. It was the fury of a man pushed too far, a man whose carefully constructed peace was being threatened. When she finished, he pulled her close. "You did a brave thing, little one," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "A kind thing. But kindness to one man can look like treason to another in this land." He rose and went to the small, greased paper window, peering out into the moonless night. "Higgins, he's a snake in the grass. And a snake will always strike when it feels cornered, or when it sees something it wants badly enough." The days that followed were taut with unspoken anxiety. Thomas's vigilance intensified. He began to patrol the perimeter of their small claim at dawn and dusk, his old rifle, cleaned and oiled with a craftsman's care, now a constant companion. He moved with a hunter's quiet, his senses alert, noting the disturbed pebbles, the bent grass, the slightest sound that was out of place. He showed Lily and how to bank the fire so it left almost no smoke, how to find water in unlikely places, knowledge that seemed to come from a deep, forgotten well within him. He was teaching her to survive, not just the elements, but men. Higgins' men became a more frequent, unwelcome sight. They'd ride along the fence line, sometimes just sitting their horses, watching the cabin with insolent stares. One morning, Thomas found a length of their already patched fence torn down, their 3 precious chickens scattered and squawking. He said nothing, his jaw set like stone, but repaired the damage with swift, angry movements. His eyes, when he looked towards Higgins' ranch, were like chips of ice. He was a man holding a storm in check, but the pressure was building. He was cataloging every slight, every threat, his mind working with cold precision. The quiet farmer was receding, and something older, harder, was beginning to surface. The storm broke on a blisteringly hot morning. The familiar, comforting murmur of Whisper Creek had dwindled overnight. Thomas, his face grim, walked upstream, Lily and hurrying to keep pace, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. They found the cause just beyond their property line, on a stretch of land Higgins had started to fence off, claiming it as new pasture. Higgins himself was there, overseeing 3 of his ranch hands as they finished constructing a crude but brutally effective dam of boulders and felled cottonwood logs. The creek, their lifeblood, was being choked off. Thomas approached, his body thrumming with a tightly leashed fury. He stopped a few paces from Higgins, his hands open at his sides, but his stance was that of a man who would not be easily moved. "Higgins," Thomas said, his voice dangerously soft, "you know what this creek means to us." Higgins turned, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across his florid face. He gestured with a half-smoked cigar. "Well now, Thomas, times change. I need this water for my herd. More than you do, I reckon. This here patch is on my surveyed line. Or it will be, once the paperwork goes through." He winked at one of his men, a burly, red-faced man who spat a stream of tobacco juice near Thomas's worn boots. "There's always been enough," Thomas stated, his gaze unwavering, "if it's shared. This is needless." Higgins let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Sharing? I ain't the sharing kind, Thomas, especially not with someone so stubborn. Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a sneer as his eyes darted to Lily Ann, who cowered slightly behind her father. "Heard you been consorting with savages. Bad for the territory, that kind of thing. Bad for decent folk." One of Higgins' men, a wiry individual with a long, cruel scar down his cheek, swaggered forward, his hand hovering near the colt at his hip. He said what the boss says goes, farmer. You best learn that. Thomas stood his ground. The sun beat down. The air was thick with menace. Lily Ann could feel the coiled tension in her father, the immense effort of his restraint. He was outnumbered, outgunned, at least for now. His eyes, however, were not the eyes of a beaten man. They were assessing, calculating. He saw the way Higgins' men glanced at each other, their confidence not as solid as their employers'. He saw the tremor in Higgins' own hand as he raised the cigar to his lips. But he also knew this was not the time, not the place. With a slow, deliberate movement that spoke of a will deferred, not broken, he placed a hand on Lily Ann's shoulder. "Come," he said, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. He turned and walked away, Lily Ann scurrying beside him, casting a fearful glance back at the gloating face of Higgins. "You'll be back, Thomas," Higgins shouted after them, his voice dripping with malice. "When you're dry enough, you'll crawl back, begging me to buy you out for pennies." The days that followed were a slow torment. Whisper Creek, their vibrant, living friend, shrank to a muddy trickle, then to cracked, parched earth. The green along its banks withered and died. Their chickens drooped, their tiny garden shriveled. The water in their rain barrel dwindled with terrifying speed. Thomas grew gaunt, his eyes shadowed with a despair he tried to hide from Lily Ann. But she saw it, felt it in the deepening silence of the cabin. He would stand for hours, staring at the dead creek bed, the failure to provide, to protect, etching new lines onto his face. Lily Ann's heart ached. The memory of Kachi, the Comanche warrior, returned to her with an insistent clarity, his thirst, his pride, the unspoken gratitude in his eyes. A tiny, desperate seed of an idea, wild and improbable, began to take root in her young mind. She had to do something. The seed of Lily Ann's idea blossomed into a desperate, courageous plan. She knew the risks. Her father would never allow it. But the sight of the dying land, the silent agony in Thomas's eyes, the looming specter of thirst and ruin, these were spurs too sharp to ignore. She remembered the direction the Comanche warrior, Kachi, had taken when he'd vanished into the wilderness. She recalled every lesson her father had taught her about tracking, about survival, lessons that now felt preordained, under the pale light of a pre-dawn sky. While Thomas slept the fitful sleep of a man burdened by impossible choices, Lily Ann slipped from the cabin. In a small cloth bundle, she carried a strip of dried venison, hoarded from their dwindling supplies, and a small, smooth river stone, cool to the touch, a token of Whisper Creek's once vibrant life. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her small face was set with a determination far beyond her years. She found the arroyo, then cast about for Kachi's trail. The signs were faint, days old, scoured by wind and sun, but her father had been a patient teacher, and she a keen student. A bent twig here, an almost invisible scuff on a rock there, the faint indentation of a moccasin print in a patch of sheltered dust. She pushed onward, deeper into the harsh, broken land than she had ever dared venture alone. The sun climbed, a merciless eye in the vast blue, and the heat pressed down. Doubt, cold and insidious, whispered at the edges of her resolve. What if she was lost? What if Kachi was gone? What if she encountered others, less noble than the warrior she sought? But the image of her father, his shoulders bowed, his spirit dimming, drove her forward. Hours later, when her own canteen was nearly empty and exhaustion was a leaden weight in her small limbs, she topped a low, rocky mesa, and there, nestled in a hidden canyon, a thin plume of smoke curled into the still air. Hope, sharp and painful, surged through her. Moving with the caution of a wild creature, she crept closer, her small body hugging the sparse cover, until she could see them. A small band of Comanche warriors, perhaps half a dozen, were gathered around a low fire, and among them, standing taller, his bearing unmistakable even from this distance, was Kachi, taking a steadying breath that did little to calm the wild fluttering in her chest. Lily Ann stepped into the open, her bundle held before her like a fragile offering. Every head in the camp snapped towards her. A sudden, heavy silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Weapons were subtly, instantly, at the ready. Stern, unsmiling faces regarded her, suspicion etched in every line. A settler child, alone, miles from any known homestead. Kachi recognized her. His eyes, dark and piercing, widened almost imperceptibly. Surprise, then a dawning understanding, flickered across his stoic features. He spoke, a rapid string of guttural words, to his companions. The palpable tension in the camp eased, though their watchful gaze did not waver. Kachi strode towards her, his movements fluid and powerful. "Little one," he said, his English slow but precise. "Why are you here? This is no place for a child of your people." Tears threatening, Lillian poured out her story. She spoke of Higgins, the stolen water, the dying creek, her father's despair. She spoke of their dwindling hope. She offered him her meager bundle. I thought, perhaps you could help us," she finished, her voice a mere whisper, her eyes pleading. Kachi listened, his expression unreadable at first. He took the bundle, his gaze fixed on her small, earnest face. But when she spoke of Higgins by name, and of the damming of Whisper Creek, a new, harder light entered his eyes. His jaw tightened. He then told her something that sent a chill down her spine, despite the desert heat. "This man, Higgins," Kachi said, his voice now like flint. "His work with the water, it is near the place where the spirits of our grandfathers sleep. He has disturbed sacred ground. He has fouled a place of our ancestors. He did not know this, little one, but your coming has brought us word of a great sacrilege." This was the hidden truth, the fulcrum upon which everything would now turn. It was no longer just about repaying a debt of water to a child. Higgins, in his blind, blundering greed, had committed an offense that, to the Comanche, was unforgivable. He had, quite literally, danced on the graves of their ancestors. Kachi then revealed more. He was not merely a warrior of the band. He was Kachi, son of Pita Nakona, a chief renowned for his wisdom in peace and his fury in war. Kachi himself had been on a solitary journey, a vision quest, when he had become lost and nearly perished. Lillian's simple act of kindness had saved not just a warrior, but the heir to a powerful legacy. A debt of honor had been incurred, and now a sacred duty called. Lillian stared, a new comprehension dawning. This was far bigger, far more dangerous, and far more hopeful than she could ever have imagined. Kachi looked down at the small, dust-covered girl who had shown such extraordinary courage. "You have a brave heart, little one," he said, a rare smile touching his lips. "And you have brought news that demands swift action. We will ride." The destiny of Whisper Creek and of Bartholomew Higgins had just taken a very sharp, very dangerous turn. Kachi moved with the swift decisiveness of a leader. A council was quickly convened. Lily and a small, incongruous figure amidst the hardened warriors listened as Kachi spoke, his voice resonant with controlled anger and a deep sense of violated sanctity. He told them of Higgins, of the stolen water, but most damningly, of the desecration of their ancestral burial grounds. As he spoke, the faces of the warriors hardened, their eyes gleaming with a cold, implacable fury. This was an insult that cut to the very soul of their people. It demanded retribution. Within minutes, a dozen warriors, lean and formidable, were mounted on their painted war ponies, their expressions grim. Kachi, his own face a mask of resolute purpose, turned to Lily-Ann. "You will guide us," he stated. Not a request, but a command softened by respect. "Show us this dam. Show us this man, Higgins." A tremor of fear ran through Lily-Ann, but it was overshadowed by a surge of fierce hope. She nodded, her small hand pointing the way she had come. Riding double with a young warrior whose eyes held a surprising gentleness, she led the Comanche war party. They moved like wraiths across the landscape, swift and silent, their passage stirring little more than dust devils. When they reached the crest overlooking Thomas's homestead, they saw him. He was standing by the Dead Creek bed, his shoulders slumped, a figure of profound desolation. His head jerked up as the riders appeared, his body instantly snapping into a posture of wary defense. His hand instinctively went to the axe that was always near. Alarm, then a complex mixture of emotions, crossed his face as he saw the Comanche, armed and ready for battle, with his daughter riding among them. Kachi dismounted and approached Thomas alone, his hand raised, palm open, in the universal sign of peace. "Your daughter is brave, settler," Kachi said, his voice carrying clearly. "She sought us out. She told of the water thief, Higgins, and she led us to understand that he has trespassed on ground sacred to my people. He defiles it with his presence." Thomas's gaze shifted from Kachi to Lily and then back to the warrior. He saw the unwavering resolve in Kachi's eyes, the deadly seriousness of his companions. He saw the desperation of his own plight, and in Kachi, he saw an echo of a younger, wilder version of himself, a man he thought long buried. The quiet farmer, the man who had sought only to be left alone, knew that peace was a luxury he could no longer afford. A grim understanding passed between them. He nodded slowly. "What is your plan?" Kachi outlined it succinctly. They would confront Higgins. They would destroy the dam. They would ensure their sacred ground was never again violated. Thomas listened, his expression unreadable. This was a perilous alliance, a step into a world he had tried to escape. But then he looked at Lily and at her small, hopeful face, and the decision was made. "I ride with you," Thomas said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. He strode into the cabin and emerged moments later, not with the axe, but with the old, long-barreled rifle. He checked its load with a smooth, practiced motion that spoke of lethal familiarity, a motion that did not go unnoticed by Kachi. The farmer, it was clear, had teeth. The unlikely war party, the determined homesteader, his courageous child, and the grim-faced Comanche warriors rode hard towards Higgins' dam. They found him there, along with his 3 remaining hands, still adding rocks to the illegal structure, their faces smug in the afternoon sun. Higgins looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief, then to a dawning, sickening fear as he took in the sight of the approaching riders. "Well, well, Thomas," Higgins blustered, his voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. "Made some new friends, have you?" He spat contemptuously. "It won't help you. This is my land, my water." He puffed out his chest, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. Kachi rode his pony to the forefront, his presence radiating an icy menace that dwarfed Higgins' bluster. "This ground you foul, Higgins," Kachi's voice was like the scrape of steel on stone, "is soaked in the tears of our mothers and the blood of our warriors. You steal water, yes, but you also dance on the graves of our ancestors. For this, there is a reckoning." Higgins scoffed, trying to regain his composure. "Superstitious heathen talk. I answer to no one but the law of the territory." But his eyes darted nervously, and his men began to shuffle, their bravado fading rapidly. They knew the Comanche. They knew what happened when sacred lines were crossed. "You will answer now," Kachi declared. And then the desert exploded. It was less a battle, more a swift, brutal correction. Higgins' hired guns, motivated by wages, not conviction, were no match for the righteous fury of the Comanche, or for Thomas. The quiet farmer moved with a deadly efficiency that was terrifying to behold. His rifle spoke once, twice, and Higgins' 2 most aggressive men went down, not dead, but certainly out of the fight, clutching wounded limbs. He wasn't a berserker. He was a surgeon, precise and cold, each shot placed with chilling accuracy. Lily and, whom Thomas had pushed behind a large boulder at the first sign of trouble, watched with a mixture of terror and a strange, fierce pride. This was her father, a man she was only now beginning to truly understand. Higgins, seeing his support evaporate, turned to flee, his bulk making him clumsy. Kachi, on his fleet-footed pony, cut him off with contemptuous ease. The big man blubbered, falling to his knees, begging for his life, his arrogance dissolving like sugar in water. The remaining ranch hand, seeing the tide turn so decisively, threw his gun down and raised his hands high. It was over in moments. The dam, Higgins' monument to his own greed, was systematically dismantled. Warriors and Thomas alike rolled boulders aside, heaved logs free. And then, with a joyful sigh, Whisper Creek began to flow again. A trickle at first, then a growing stream, then a laughing, gurgling rush of clear, cool water, racing towards the thirsty land. The sound was a prayer answered, a song of liberation. Bartholomew Higgins, his face pale and streaked with tears of self-pity, was bound securely. Kachi informed him, his voice devoid of emotion, that he would be taken before the elders of the Comanche nation to account for his desecration of their holy sites. His reign of intimidation and theft was finished. His name would become a whisper of warning, not a shout of power. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Whisper Creek sang its way past Thomas's homestead, its waters reflecting the fiery sunset. Thomas and Kachi stood side by side, watching it, a profound, unspoken understanding between them. The chasm of their different worlds had been bridged by shared peril and mutual respect, a bridge built on the unlikely foundation of a child's compassion. "Your daughter," Kachi said, his gaze softening as he looked at Lily Ann, who was now ankle-deep in the cool water, her face alight with pure joy. "She has the courage of a warrior, Thomas, but the heart of a peace-bringer. It is a powerful spirit." Thomas looked at his daughter, and a love so fierce it ached swelled in his chest. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for so long had begun to recede, replaced by a quiet strength, a hard-won peace. He simply nodded, emotion too thick for words. The Comanche warriors prepared to depart. Before they rode, Kachi pressed a small, beautifully beaded pouch into Lily Ann's hand. "A token," he said, "for the water given and the water returned. Remember us." They melted into the twilight, as silent and mysterious as they had arrived, leaving behind a homestead saved and a future subtly, irrevocably altered. An uneasy peace, perhaps, but a peace nonetheless, now lay over Whisper Creek. The wild, untamed West would continue to test them, but for now, life flowed on, renewed and resilient. The destinies of a small girl, a quiet farmer with a hidden past, and a proud Comanche warrior, once set on divergent paths, were now woven together, a testament to the enduring truth that even in the harshest of lands, the smallest act of kindness could change everything forever. The desert held its breath, and for a time, all was still.